So in today's video, we are going to learn about how Jordan Peterson really feels about Muslim countries. Now, brace yourself because it's pretty intense. Now, the context of this conversation is Jordan Peterson was postulating about how functional and democratic Catholic and Protestant countries are outside of Africa. And he was mentioning this to try and emphasize how Muslim countries aren't. So Piers Morgan responded to this essentially saying that he's met Arabs that would actually laugh at the idea that they have to look at the West as some sort of template for how their country should exist. But this triggered Jordan Peterson so much. I mean, just think about it. How dare these Arab Muslim countries, how dare they not want the West to dictate everything about their lives, their culture, their government, their countries? Here, I'll let Jordan Peterson himself explain.
It's pretty bloody easy for the rich Muslim countries who are absolutely awash in, I would say, undeserved oil money to moralize about the superiority of their culture. I mean, the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia were a little, fringe tribal cult before the West stupidly dumped $1 trillion on them and allowed them to propagandize the entire world. They would have been a backwoods Arab tribe lost in the desert forever if it wasn't for oil money.
Wow, he went full mask off there. Let's break down what Jordan Peterson just said. Let's really analyze it. Because I really feel like anti-Arab and anti-Muslim propaganda has been so strong for so long. This just flew over people's heads. Let's break this down. He said, it's pretty bloody easy for the rich Muslim countries who are absolutely awash in, I would say, undeserved oil money to moralize about the superiority of their culture. Now, what was the context again of this situation? Was this conversation about how the Arabs are trying to moralize about the superiority of their culture? No, it was about Jordan Peterson doing that. He's the one sitting there talking about, oh, the Arab countries are like this and they're not functional, but meanwhile the Christian, Protestant, and Catholic countries outside of Africa are 100% democratic and highly functional. He was the one doing that. So all that Piers Morgan did was suggest, hey, Jordan, you know what? There are Muslims, there are Arabs who don't think you should be dictating to them about how they should run their lives and run their countries and their governments and what sort of morality they should adopt. So he was the one, Jordan Peterson was the one moralizing about the superiority of his culture. Which makes one question, well, if the Muslims and the Arabs are undeserving, then why is he so deserving? Why are the Muslim countries undeserving, but the West is deserving? What is it? And really, Jordan Peterson is telling on himself. He's just exposing his own inner feelings. Because who said that the rich Muslim countries moralize about the superiority of their country just because of their oil money, just because of their wealth? That's not something that Muslim Arabs consider to be the most praiseworthy aspects of their culture. Apparently, you're the one that thinks it's wealth that makes a culture superior somehow. Otherwise, why else would you even bring that up? And if that's the case, why is the West so deserving of their wealth? How is the history of Great Britain and America so much better and making them so much more deserving of wealth in comparison to Muslim Arab countries that benefited from their oil? Oh, well, I guess you answer that in your next sentence. You say, I quote, I mean, the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia were a little fringe tribal cult before the West stupidly dumped $1 trillion on them. Oh, so that's what happened. As you put it, we have this backwards Arab cult in the middle of the desert, just lost, roaming around. And then the West comes along and they just dump trillions of dollars on them. Well, clearly you seem to have no understanding regarding that region, the people in it, or the history of where that oil money came from. So let me try to unpack it piece by piece. Firstly, the Arabs in that region were not some sort of backwards cult that was lost in the desert. You ever heard of a city called Mecca? Yes, Mecca, the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even before his birth, people were making pilgrimage to Mecca because the Kaaba in Mecca was built by Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail, peace be upon them both. It's Islam's holiest site and the direction of prayer. It's the Qibla for all Muslims worldwide. So nobody's lost in the desert over there. They know exactly where they are. And Muslims from around the world know exactly where they are because we face that direction when we pray. Millions of people make pilgrimage there every year. But you're not the first to underestimate the Arabs of that region. 1400 years ago, other empires also scoffed at them, thinking that these were just primitive backwards tribes in the middle of the desert that were lost roaming around. But then this happened. And while Europe was in its dark ages, Muslims were making their contributions to the world. When it comes to medicine, science, geography, education, so many different things. But at the end of the day, it all goes back to Mecca. It all goes back to the fact that Allah, God, the Creator, sent his final prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from this region. But let's get back to the oil situation, because you know what country has the largest oil reserves in the entire world? It's not Saudi Arabia. It's not even an Arab Muslim country. It's actually Venezuela. I mean, look at how close Venezuela is to the United States. Why didn't they just dump trillions of dollars on Venezuela? Not only are they right next to the United States and Canada, but they're also a Christian country. They're one of those majority Christian countries, Jordan Peterson, that you were claiming is so highly functional and democratic. Wait a second, it says here under government that they have an authoritarian dictatorship. I'm confused because Jordan Peterson said 100% of majority Catholic and Protestant countries outside of Africa are democratic and highly functional. Dr. Peterson, you know Venezuela isn't in Africa, right? I mean, yeah, they're brown, but they're on a completely different continent. Unfortunately, Venezuela has not been able to capitalize on their oil reserves in the same way that Saudi Arabia has. Decades of poor governance have driven what was once one of Latin America's most prosperous countries to economic and political ruin. So I guess it's not as simple as just dumping trillions of dollars on people in order to get their oil. But rather, the Saudis actually showed intelligence, foresight, ambition, ability for them to be able to benefit from their oil in ways that other countries haven't. For example, your country, Jordan Peterson, Canada, is said to have the third most oil reserves in the world, after Venezuela first and Saudi Arabia second. So maybe you're wrong about them being some sort of backwards fringe cult lost in the desert. That actually seems quite offensive, quite bigoted. I mean, that's a pretty awful thing to say. I'm really actually quite shocked that you openly said this on such a large platform and seemingly got no backlash. I mean, how powerful is the anti-Muslim Arab propaganda that you can do something like that? And nobody even seemingly notices. But there's one last lie of Jordan Peterson that I'd like to address, and that is refuting this idea that the West just dumped $1 trillion on them. What actually happened is Saudi Arabia and America conducted trade with one another. They came to agreements that each side viewed as mutually beneficial. America wasn't giving them money as charity, but rather they were buying oil that they needed. Ever heard of the 1973 oil crisis, also known as the Saudi oil embargo? Believe it or not, but this also involves Palestine. That's right, history did not begin on October 7th, 2023. So when it comes to oil, by 1969, American domestic output of oil was peaking and could not keep pace with increasing demand from vehicles. By 1972, 83% of the American oil imports came from the Middle East. In 1973, Israel requested $850 million worth of American arms and equipment. So President Nixon decided that instead of sending $850 million worth of arms that Israel requested, that America would send $2.2 billion worth of arms to Israel. I mean, Jordan Peterson, you're the one who brought up dumping tons of undeserved money on people. You say that Saudi Arabia was actually undeserving of getting money for trading with the United States. They were getting money from the United States because they were providing them oil. They were doing business together. What exactly do you call this? So this arms lift enraged King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, and he retaliated on October 20th, 1973 by placing a total embargo on oil shipments to the United States. Faisal was angry that Israel had only asked for $850 million worth of American weapons and instead received an unsolicited $2.2 billion worth of weapons, which he perceived as a sign of the pro-Israeli slant of American foreign policy. So what do you think that some people suggested be done? That Saudi Arabia dare not sell their oil to the United States. Initially, the Secretary of Defense suggested that the USA invade Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries and seize their oil fields. Kissinger stated in a private State Department meeting that it's ridiculous that the civilized world is held up by 8 million savages. Can't we overthrow one of the sheikhs just to show that we can do it? They formed a plan to invade Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And it seems like Jordan Peterson, he might agree with this ideology because the Arabs, they don't deserve that oil. The West deserves the oil. And if you won't give it to us, we'll take it. And again, why was all this happening? Because the US just wanted so badly to send their money to Israel. To not only send them weapons, but to send them more weapons than they even asked for. Kissinger publicly threatened countermeasures in a November 21st, 1973 press conference if the embargo was not lifted. How did the Saudis respond? The Saudis responded with threatening further oil cuts and to burn their oil fields if the US military invaded. And this is something that didn't seem to enter Jordan Peterson's head. When he conflated oil money with moralizing the superiority of Muslim Arab culture. Have you never heard the famous quote of King Faisal, rahimahullah? When all this threatening was going on about them losing their oil money? He said, "We lived and our ancestors lived on dates and milk, and we will return to them." He said, "We'll go back to living off dates and milk." You see, some people, they live for a greater purpose than just acquiring money and power. After the CIA confirmed these threats, Kissinger gave up military intervention and decided that dealing with Israel's troop withdrawals and settled on diplomatic solutions to the oil embargo. So Jordan Peterson really just exposed himself in this interview. And we'll see as this interview continues, he has that same warmongering mentality if the Muslim Arabs don't fall in line with Western demands, which we'll talk about in the next video, inshallah. Allah knows best. Thank you for watching. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.